Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media.
The laughter of children echoed through the forest as the teachers directed them to line up for photos. Teachers made sure their jackets were zipped up to guard them against the November chill prior to their planned hike along the river trail. After a quick count of heads, students were instructed to stay close together and watch the trail to avoid accidental falls. The babbling of the Bellacula River contributed its peaceful churn to the conversations and laughter. By lunchtime, the children and their teachers found a good spot to eat their sandwiches. Students grouped up and chose their preferred spots before sitting down and opening up their lunch pails. Laughter and conversation created a din as everyone relaxed, bathed in the beauty of the forest and riverbank around them. Timber loudly popped as something big was moving toward the group from up the slope, and teachers leapt to their feet. A brown blur raced from the brush, followed by two smaller, similar blurs. It was a massive sow grizzly, and she was charging toward the children. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Bella Coola sits at the inland end of a long fjord on British Columbia's central coast, a place tourism brochures call the gateway to the Great Bear Rainforest. Glaciers carve this valley, leaving steep, forested mountainsides that run straight down into a ribbon of floodplain, threaded by the Bellacula River and its salmon-rich side channels. Chilling ocean breezes rush inland here, bringing long, wet winters and cool, cloudy summers. The climate is mild enough that rain is more common than deep snow on the valley floor, but the mountains catch enormous amounts of moisture, feeding streams that tumble down through shadowed gullies. Those valley walls are draped in classic coastal conifer rainforest. Western red cedar, western hemlock, Sitka spruce, and Douglas fir stack their crowns into multiple layers of green, some trees old enough to remember when grizzlies were still openly hunted here. Sword ferns fill the understory, and thickets of devil's club stand like spiny barricades along wet seeps, their broad leaves hiding clusters of red berries that grizzlies relish. Under the trees, salmonberry and red huckleberry tangle with trailing blackberry and common snowberry, painting the edges of creeks and seeps with summer fruit that feeds bears, birds, and people alike. On the mountainsides above the valley, mule deer and moose browse willow and subalpine shrubs. Mountain goats cling to cliff bands and wind-sculpted ridges, while black bears, grizzlies, wolves, and cougars move along game trails that are much older than the logging roads below. Tweedsmuir South Provincial Park, just up the valley, protects a vast block of this mountain and river country, and for decades, hunters, anglers, and now bear viewing operators have all come here for a chance to share space with big animals in a big landscape and a natural setting. On Thursday, November 20th, 2025, the school children walked a single-file line along the river in the small Nuxalk community of 4 Mile, a short drive from the town of Bella Coola. A group of roughly 20 students from Nuxalk School, a First Nation independent school operated by the Nuxalk Nation, set out with their teachers along a wooded river path. They were intermediate-age kids, 4th and 5th graders, old enough to be excited about being out of the classroom, but young enough that most still stuck close to their friends and favorite teachers. Axalta's staff were used to teaching in a place where bears are part of the background of daily life. Wildlife safety is not an abstract concept in a valley where people can look out of their kitchen windows and see a sow and cubs walking along the river gravel, or a black bear nosing through wind-fallen apples in a neighbor's yard. Teachers in Bellacula carry bear spray on outings and talk with students about how to behave around wildlife. Parents here grow up hearing stories from elders about Nuxalk relationships with bears, not as cartoon threats, but as powerful neighbors on the land. On that day, one of those teachers, whom we'll call Mr. Williams, was supervising the trail walk and keeping a wary eye on the brush alongside the trail. With him were at least 2 other teachers, including one woman who walked with crutches. They were not armed with rifles or shotguns, but only bear spray and a noisemaker, and the hard-earned knowledge that if a bear comes, the adults are the ones who stand between children and claws and jaws. To understand how this incident transpired, it helps to step back and look at what has been happening in the Bellacula Valley in recent years. For generations, Nuxalk people have shared this valley with grizzly bears, rooted in a worldview that treats bears as powerful beings, rather than wildlife to be managed. In colonial times, and well into the 20th century, outside hunters came for those same grizzlies, booking guided trips up tributary valleys and across nearby plateaus to hunt deer, goats, moose, wolves, and bears. That business model has shifted in recent decades. One longtime guide in the region has described how he moved from leading big game hunts to running bear viewing tours, taking visitors out to watch bears fishing for salmon instead of shooting them. This cultural shift provides insight into how grizzlies react to the presence of people in their habitat after dramatic policy changes. At the provincial level, British Columbia added licensed grizzly bear trophy hunting, beginning with the spring hunt of 2018. Since then, the bears of the central and north coast, including those of the Great Bear Rainforest, have become even more important to tourism-based economies that depend on visitors coming to see live bears on salmon rivers and estuaries. Conservationists and many First Nations supported the hunting ban, but hunting organizations warned that it might change how often people encounter grizzlies. In the Bellacula area, residents had already begun to notice more bears on doorsteps and in yards. Just weeks before the school group attack, one local couple returned home to find their front door folded in half like tinfoil, the interior of their house wrecked, and a metal trailer on their property ripped open, furnace destroyed, and propane missing. Other residents reported bears in their gardens and break-ins to outbuildings. The province's conservation officers confirmed that bear encounters in the region had become more common, part of a wider pattern of grizzly conflicts that, according to some hunting advocates, have roughly doubled province-wide since the end of the legal hunt. Layered over these human decisions are the pressures of a changing environment. Nuxalk leaders and bear biologists point to logging that has altered forest structure, wildfires that have burned low-elevation slopes, and droughts that stress berry crops and salmon runs. When salmon runs are poor, berry patches are sparse, or winter is late in coming, bears may push down into valleys and stay later into the autumn, looking for food closer to people's homes. The idea that weakened food webs and shifting seasons may have made a sow grizzly and her cubs more likely to be moving through a river valley trail in late November is a conclusion drawn from those broader patterns, but it fits with what local observers are seeing on the ground. The students arrived at the Bellacula River Trail earlier in the morning and had hiked into a fairly remote stretch of it by midday. Around early afternoon, the school group stopped at a quiet stretch of trail near the river in the 4-mile area. Students set down packs, unwrapped sandwiches, and sat in loose clusters beneath the trees. A cool, damp silence hung over the valley, broken by the chatter and laughter of children and the sound of the river. Somewhere upslope, a female grizzly with 2 cubs was moving through the forest. Conservation officers now believe that this was a family group, a sow and 2 young bears that had already been spending time near the community in the days before the incident. They were likely hungry and continued to search for food with the late onset of winter. Witnesses say the bear appeared suddenly out of the tree line and charged toward the group as they were eating. One 10-year-old boy later told reporters he was close enough to feel the bear's fur as it ran past him, veering toward other children and the adults who rose to meet it. 3 teachers moved instantly. One began firing a can of bear spray, then a second can, emptying both as the grizzly plowed through the chaotic scene. Another teacher jumped on the animal and began hitting it, an almost unimaginable act of courage when you consider the size difference between a nearly full-grown grizzly and a human being. The teacher who walked with crutches swung them like clubs, striking the bear again and again. In those seconds, the bear made contact with multiple people. 3 students received serious injuries, including at least 2 with critical trauma. Mr. Williams bore the brunt of the bear's anger and violence, taking blows and bites meant for the children. He was later flown out of the valley to a hospital in Vancouver. Several other children and adults suffered more moderate wounds or were doused in bear spray during the desperate effort to drive the bear away. Finally, under that combined wall of spray, blows, and yelling, the grizzly turned and retreated into the timber, her cubs following or already moving ahead of her. Students screamed or sat in stunned silence. Some were bleeding. Others clung to uninjured classmates. Teachers began the hard work of triage, comforting children, applying pressure to wounds, and accounting for every student while someone called for help from a satellite phone or cell signal, depending on who could connect first. Paramedics, community first responders, and eventually air ambulances converged on the valley. 7 of the injured were treated on scene or at local facilities. 4, including 3 children and a teacher, were transported to hospitals farther away, some by helicopter. In the hours that followed, families gathered at the community youth center and outside the local health clinic, waiting for news. Nuxalk leadership closed Axalta School for the day and paused all outdoor activities. A cultural fire was lit outside the youth center and kept burning as a place for prayer, grief, and strength, while counselors and cultural support workers met with children and parents who had just seen a class outing turn into a nightmare. At the same time, the British Columbia Conservation Officer Service launched what they later described as one of the most dangerous operations they undertake, tracking and dealing with a family group of grizzlies that had already attacked people. Teams of conservation officers fanned out through the Bellacula River Valley, working in shifts through cold, dark nights. They set traps, collected tracks and hair samples, and planned to use DNA to confirm the identity of any bears they might capture. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police provided aircraft equipped with thermal imaging to sweep the forest for heat signatures. Residents were asked not to join the search, no matter how badly they wanted to help, because the risk of stumbling into a wounded or defensive sow with cubs is simply too high. Nuxalk leadership organized rides for people who would normally walk, encouraging community members to stay inside as much as possible and to report any bear sightings immediately. As of the latest updates at the time of writing, conservation officers believe a female grizzly and 2 young bears were involved, and the primary sow remains at large. Any bears caught in the search area will be evaluated in consultation with biologists and a provincial veterinarian to decide whether release, relocation, or euthanization is appropriate once investigators are confident they have identified the specific bear or bears responsible. In British Columbia, there are roughly 15,000 grizzly bears spread across 55 management units, ranging from dry interior mountains to the rain-drenched coastal fjords like Bella Coola. Direct inventories and modeling work done for the 2018 provincial estimates show that some of the highest bear densities in the province occur along salmon rivers in coastal units, such as Tweedsmuir and Kwatna-Awakino, landscapes very similar to the Bellacula Valley. The Great Bear Rainforest, within which Bellacula forms an important gateway community, covers millions of hectares of coastal temperate rainforest and hosts both black bears and grizzlies, as well as the famous white-coated Kermode, or spirit bear. Grizzly viewing and other wildlife tourism are now major economic drivers there, replacing much of the revenue that once came from trophy hunting. At the same time, increased human presence along rivers, roads, and lodge sites means there are more chances for people to make mistakes with food storage and garbage, and more ways for bears to connect human spaces with easy calories. In the decades before British Columbia's grizzly trophy hunt ban, annual calls to conservation officers about grizzly conflicts reportedly ranged from roughly 300 to 500, with most calls being between April and November. Since the ban, one provincial hunting organization says those calls have climbed to nearly 1,000 a year, though conservation scientists point out that correlations between hunt status and conflict rates are complex and not always straightforward. What is clear is that along the Central Coast, Communities like Bella Coola are now seeing more bears in their yards and on their porches, and that each of those encounters carries at least some risk if people are unprepared. Regarding the grizzly's motives in the attack on the group, they're as complex as any bear attack. Conservation officers have stressed that the attack was highly unusual, especially given the size of the group and the fact that teachers were following standard safety protocols. One likely factor is that this was a mother with cubs. Family groups are notoriously unpredictable. A sow that perceives any threat to her cubs may respond with explosive aggression, even if the apparent threat is a group of children sitting on the ground. The bear may also have been wounded before this encounter. Investigators have suggested that signs at the scene and the bear's behavior point to the possibility that she was already injured, which can make any wild animal more defensive and more prone to overreact. Food stress is another likely ingredient. When salmon numbers are low in autumn and berry crops are patchy, thanks to drought or heat waves, bears that have not yet built enough fat for winter may stay out later than usual, roaming wider and taking more risks. In a narrow valley where human trails hug the same river corridors that bears use, those risks could bring a sow and her cubs into close contact with people who did everything they were taught to do. That connection between stressed food webs, longer foraging seasons, and surprise encounters with people is built from a combination of local reports and broader climate studies, but it matches what Nuxalk residents and grizzly researchers alike are describing. The sow didn't kill and cache any of the victims, thankfully. This rules out a strictly predatory attack. There was no animal carcass cached nearby, so that's off the list. Authorities concluded the bear was reacting defensively to protect herself and her cubs from a perceived threat. Speaking of cubs, our Cub Tier membership on Patreon, linked below, will give you ad-free early access to episodes, photos, and notes. And the $3 per month goes a long way in helping me continue to produce educational and entertaining content like this. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. How do communities like Bella Coola continue to live in a safe and peaceful relationship with grizzlies, while also protecting children on something as ordinary as a school field trip? How do provincial policies around hunting, forestry, and salmon management ripple down into the life and death choices a single sow makes on a river trail? And what does true coexistence look like when cultural shifts in wildlife management rewrite the rules for both humans and bears at the same time? For now, the focus in 4 Mile is on healing. Students and teachers will carry the memories of that day for the rest of their lives. Parents will feel their stomachs tighten every time a school bus leaves the driveway for an outing near the woods. Conservation officers will keep walking the valley floor, reading tracks in the mud, and weighing impossible decisions about any bears they find. I will gladly read and reply to your thoughts, so post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.